against us. Afghanistan is 33 million. It's a part of it, but you have to see it as part of the region. And everything that we're trying to do has to be seen against the backdrop of the Indo-Pakistani conflict. It's a cold conflict at the moment, but it could get hot. And you're looking at interests in Islamabad that do not align with ours. They are not going to accept a government in Kabul right now that is aligned with India, and that happens to be the case with Karzai. So various actors have different agendas, but none of them necessarily match our own.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I think we're going to...
What would you do?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't put any more conventional forces in there. I would get the conventional force out of Afghanistan.
What do you mean by conventional? You mean leave drones?
The vast majority...
Well,
it's not a question of leaving something. First of all, we're not the only players over there. The Iranians are keenly interested in what happens. They're the principal target, by the way, for the heroin trafficking of Mr. Karzai.
Right.
Remember that under the Taliban, the heroin business was about 10% of what it is today.
Yeah.
So it's dramatically expanded under us. Karzai is the enemy for Iran because of the heroin trafficking. Karzai is the enemy in Pakistan because of his alignment with India. Then you have Russia and China who have interests, as well as the Central Asian peoples. All of these people have an interest in what's happening.
Let's get to the point. I mean, your point is that it's not going to work because it's a part of a bigger picture.
It is. It's beyond our ability. It's beyond our ability to do much.
So come home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Come home, and then what happens?
Get the conventional force out. Well, first of all, stop equating the current Afghan Taliban with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I think that's
a huge mistake.
If I could stop you right there.
I think we actually only have a window of a few minutes with Sebastian Gorka.
Okay, let's get him on. Let's get him on.
Okay, Sebastian Gorka. He is the military affairs. Do we have him?
We do have
yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Sebastian Gorka, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, is a military affairs fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. He's one of the best think tanks and activist think tanks in the country right now. And he is an expert on counterterrorism and terrorism. He originally came from Hungary, escaped during the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. He's an international recognized authority on all these issues: terrorism, security, democratization. He's worked in NGOs, he's worked at RAND, he's worked at think tanks, he's been an advisor to the Secretary of Defense, he teaches at West Point, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he's one of the country's probably foremost experts in this field. So, Dr. Gorka, turning right over to you, why don't you tell us why you think President Obama's Afghan war policy is terrific and why it's going to work?
I'm not going to tell you it's terrific. I'm going to tell you that we have to finish the job that was started by the Bush administration in October 2001. I'm not a big fan of nation building. I agree with the Colonel that the speech was not a good speech because it didn't match strategies to means and methods. However, if we went in there to prevent another September the 11th, another attack on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens, we have to finish the job.
But what's finish the job mean? I mean, what is your end goal here? What do you envision, and when do you envision it by July of 2011?
Look, it's not about, strategy is not about deadlines, strategy is not about withdrawal dates. This is something the President doesn't understand here. Strategy is about setting long-term goals and making sure you have the means and the methods to achieve them. That's not what the West Point speech was about. What I would want to see, and I've written about this in numerous articles, is that we have to understand that the sovereignty of Afghanistan is never going to be fully controlled by Kabul. It's never going to be fully controlled by us or by our troops. We need to have enough troops in there, and we need to have enough special operators and intelligence operators in there to cut a deal with the people who know how to operate in the most difficult parts of Afghanistan. And that means the tribes in the east and the tribes in the south. These people have always exercised sovereignty over those very difficult terrains where the drugs come from, where the insurgents come in and out, and we have to cut a deal, and we have to say, you are going to help us, we're going to share sovereignty, and you've got to guarantee two things for us. You've got to guarantee that none of the insurgents or terrorists in your part of the world will be capable of exercising attacks against the government in Kabul. And number two, you've got to make sure there are no Al-Qaeda camps in your part of the world so that we will never...
This isn't part of Obama's plan, is it?
No.
This is absolutely... I mean, I think you make a lot of sense, but this is not what the president's talking about.
Well, Dr. Gorka, let me before I ask you a question, let me just read something we've got from one of the viewers. John from Erie, Pennsylvania, terrific town. Love the new show. So often the news is discussed by people who don't have a clue. It's great to hear from people who know. So kudos to Colonel Macgregor and Dr. Gorka, because I'm sure they're not talking about myself or KT.
No, they're not talking about
but John
you.
adds, I was a grunt in Iraq and saw a completely different war than I saw on television. I'd like to throw the question to Colonel Macgregor and also then get your response, Dr. Gorka. We're talking about this. I want to look down the road. You know, obviously, President Obama laid out the concept of a withdrawal during his speech. But even if it doesn't occur in 18 months or however long that might be, we work and we work and we work to get these people on side to deal with the people we have to deal with. What happens when those troops finally leave? What is your estimate, Colonel?
Well, again, an awful lot's going to depend upon some of the things that Dr. Gorka pointed out. I don't happen to agree with the idea of conventional forces on the ground. I think that becomes a mobilizing force for the enemy. It makes it easier for the Pashtun to recruit more fighters, frankly.
You mean that the larger the footprint, the more likely...
I concur in the special ops and the CIA and the various other actors that are at least trained and educated and in working with the local population. I think that makes sense. But I would get that conventional force out of there. It's not going to improve the situation. It's going to make matters worse. But, you know, to get back to what you were just saying, I think it's like sticking your hand into a bucket of water and then pulling it out. Don't expect to create a nation state where none exists today.
Yeah.
Stop talking about building capacity. You're not going to do it. And this idea of a large Afghan army, they don't have the gross national product to support a large force anyway.
Yeah, but,
Dr. Gorka,
yeah.
if we just get your response.
Yeah, look, I'm not a fan of nation building, but let me ask you, how long ago was World War II? How long ago was the Korean War? Both of those countries, Germany and Korea, still have U.S. troops on their soil. Why? Because it is in our national interest to have troops in areas where they can be forward deployed. Do we think Afghanistan will not represent a threat to American lives 2 years from now,
Yes.
5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Yes.
If we can't guarantee that, we're going to be involved in Central Asia.
Sebastian, let me take the argument a little further. And if what you're talking about is a longer-term commitment, I mean, especially if you reference Korea and Europe, you're envisioning a longer-term commitment, maybe not a fighting commitment, but American troops there for quite some time. When I was in Afghanistan in May, everybody I talked to, whether it was NGOs, Afghan government leaders, U.S. military, NATO military, they all envisioned, as what it sounds like you do, a much longer-term presence, fighting much longer, a larger investment, a larger footprint over a great period of time. If we do that, what then happens if you're the commander-in-chief? What then happens to all of America's other interests abroad? I mean, what happens if we have a crisis in Iran? What happens if Israel attacks Iran in the spring? How do we respond to that? What happens if Russia moves into Ukraine? What happens if China or North Korea gets aggressive in their part of the world? If we have devoted the majority of our resources and tied them up in Afghanistan, not even all of Central Asia, but in Afghanistan for a long period of time and at a great expense, does that not hamper our ability to respond to other crises internationally?
Look, military strategy, grand strategy, is about balancing acts.
Yes.
It's about trying to predict the future and laying bets against them. What I think we have to understand is this part of the world is going to be important for American interests for a long time. The real challenge for us now, yes, if we get overstretched, is to communicate to our allies in NATO and outside NATO that they have to understand that the security of their citizens is linked to Afghanistan and to Pakistan. Look at the 7/7 bombings in London. Where did those individuals who killed and injured hundreds of people on the metro system in London, where did they get their training? In Central Asia and Pakistan. This is a fact. We have to share the burden. We have to push some of the burden onto those countries that do not understand right now the direct link between the safety of their people and the stability of that part of the world.
Dr. Gorka, how much reasonably and realistically, how much support do you expect we can get from NATO? I mean, actual combat support. from NATO?
Right. Well, right now, as of Friday afternoon, the commitment from the posted through the Secretary General Rasmussen is that we already have 7,000 extra troops committed by NATO. That's good news, but on the other hand, it's pretty pathetic. We're talking about almost 30 countries, and they're stepping up to the plate with 7,000.
And those 7,000 all have conditions to their deployment, right?
Right.
Most of them. Most of them.
Right. I mean, you've got very few capable and willing to get out on the ground and support combat operations.
If I could just interrupt for a second here.